You might be wondering, what the hell is this thing? Let me tell you all about it. About a year ago, I needed to think of a CAS project for the IB diploma program, and after spending a long time racking my mind, I couldn't think of anything reasonable to build. So I decided, let's go and build something crazy, like a from-scratch 3D printer. Now, you have to realize that at the time, I had never really used a 3D printer before, let alone had I ever built one, and my skills with, electronics and tinkering were not that good. It suffices to say that this was perhaps the biggest mistake I've made so far. Building this thing, I should have just bought a 3D printer. So don't come to this video expecting advice on how to build a 3D printer. It's more like what not to do, okay? The biggest mistake, the thing you should never do is build a Delta printer yourself. You can see it's a Delta printer, it moves these three towers. Don't build a Delta printer because it's impossible to get all the angles right. With an XYZ printer, you just put a level on top and you can be reasonably sure that things will move the way they should. But here, you can make everything nearly perfect and it will still be miles off. These are probably inherent issues to Delta printers, so don't build them. But with that aside, this video kind of just shows my process, how I made the printer from start to present, and I'll offer some advice here and there of what not to do.
So, to begin the project, I started by cutting all of the wood pieces that I needed for the frame. And, using wood is not the smartest idea because wood is flexible and nail joints are also flexible. Ideally, I would have used steel, but I thought it was too expensive. And quite ironic, because at the end of the day I ended up paying with my time instead. When I cut all of the wood pieces, I realized that the wood plates for the top and bottom of the Delta geometry, they weren't really identical, they were kind of off, and so I went and I recut one of the pieces. Now, when it comes to the movement system for my printer, I made some better choices. I used steel rods and 3D printed the carriages and the effector in the middle, but I made some serious mistakes with this process as well. I went out and hunted for meter-long steel rods and overpaid for them, only to cut them down to 78 centimeters long. I could have just bought 75 centimeter long rods. Also, when it comes to the rods that attach the carriage, the effector, I bought very long rods as well, 280mm rods, and this was unnecessary, and it also caused an interesting problem where the rods were closer together at the carriage than at the effector. And because of this, whenever the effector is at the edge of the plate, it actually tilts up. When it comes to the carriages, I decided to hold the carriages to the rods using zip ties, and of course zip ties stretch whenever you put too much force on them, so I ended up having them stretch, and I had my printer lose its accuracy many times for that reason. Despite all this, though, the frame ended up straighter and in better shape than I expected. It was nearly perfect the first time around. Now, when it came to the electronics, I made the reasonable choice of getting a kit, at least for, the board, the Arduino, and some of the wires, and that actually saved me a lot of trouble because they were already pre-made, I made less mistakes. At this point, the printer was actually pretty close to being in operation. Now, I realized a couple things early on. First of all, the glass plate that I bought for the hot plate was the wrong size, so I had to reorder it. Also, whenever I first connected the Bowden tube to the Bowden coupler in the extrusion motor, I realized that the Bowden coupler was defective, so I had to then order replacements for that as well. And finally, the thing that I spent the most time on is trying to make the bed flat. When I first started, there was a 2 or more millimeter difference between one side of the bed and the other, and I tried to fix this in many ways. I thought maybe the bed itself was curved or something, so I removed the standoffs and taped the bed right down to the wood. Eventually, I kind of solved this problem by just messing around with the settings, but the issue, again, the root cause of this whole thing was that I built a wooden frame and I didn't properly level the towers and make sure they were all plumb and square.
After all that pain and all that hard work, there was finally a point when the 3D printer worked and it printed something. I was like, yes!
So after my initial success, the printer worked, I went back to testing and I continued to find more and more issues with the printer. First of all, my original end stop hitters were a little bit, makeshift, and I wanted to replace them, so I luckily was able to 3D print a couple of replacements, and I put them on. Interestingly, I forgot to turn the fan on originally, and so I was wondering why my prints were not printing that well. Also, I made a pretty serious design flaw, which is that I put all the electronics at the top of the printer, and I didn't have a cable long enough to stretch from the top of the printer to my computer. So what I had to do every time I wanted to print was take the printer and put it down on the floor and then attach the cable to my computer. Every time I did that, of course, because I had a wooden frame, the frame would always shake a little bit and I had to re-level the printer every single time. I often spent an hour or two each time. That's not what a 3D printer is supposed to be like. So I decided to fix this problem by moving the electronics from the top down to the bottom and also reinforcing the frame with diagonal braces. And after I did this, my prints were consistently bad rather than bad in an inconsistent manner. Additionally, I found that the first layer didn't stick to the print, and the printer would often drag the first layer around and make a huge mess, and this came down mostly to print speed. I was printing too quickly for this printer. I guess 0.3 millimeters a second was too much, so I could reduce it to 0.25 and fixed most problems. I also had a leaky hot end because I didn't seal it well enough, I suppose. And finally, I realized that my printer doesn't really print straight, even when it does work. I tried to print a circle, and it came out as an oval. Of course, I should probably try to fix the skew settings somewhere in Marlin, but that depends on how much time I have.
So at this point, I was like, I give up, It's now like August 2020 or whatever, and I don't have the motivation to work on this thing anymore because no matter what I do, it might improve it. I could try to, or fix the oval problems and stuff, but it's just too much work and effort, and I'd rather put that effort into a new project, which is basically what I've been doing for the last few months. At the end of the day, here's, I think, what my biggest takeaways were from this project. Don't make a Delta printer. We've already gone through that. Also, to take the easiest choice when it's possible. There were many times that I could have, bought a kit that would have made my the building of something easier. For example, I could have bought a whole kit for all the electronics plus motors, but I chose to, find bits and pieces, and not only did it cost me a lot more, but it didn't really, it gave me extra work. There was this one time when, I realized that I didn't have any cables that would run from the top here down to, the bottom. And I didn't want to pay, $10 per cable or whatever it was on Amazon, so I decided to buy myself a crimp kit. And then I spent 10 hours trying to crimp wires, use the things that have already been created before you. The second thing is to make sure you're building your design of whatever you're making off of something good. I actually find this so hilarious now, but this project is based off of one actually that I found on Instructables. And this printer, I was impressed. It was built by someone who's a lot younger than me even, and they built it at home, and it looked pretty good to me. I watched a video of it printing, and I saw it printing this weird zigzagged, zigzag print, and I was like, that seems good enough. But you should build something that is supposed to be good, This printer, I saw it in Instructables, they said they spent $500 on it. That's US dollars, right? And it didn't print properly, and I decided to go and build that rather than basing my design off of someone's design that actually works and printed things precisely and cleanly and without too much trouble. So make sure you have a good design before you go and build it, otherwise you're going to have lots of problems. At the end of the day, learning from mistakes is not fun, but it's also a lot of fun at the same time to mess up and then laugh at yourself later. So I'm glad I did this project, even though I regret it at the same time.